It absolutely does. I mean, we have the famous case or the infamous case of Walter Duranty, who covered up the Ukraine famine, 1932, 1933. And again, if you are on the side of liberalism, number one, you're in support of the notion of truth, of an objective enlightenment notion that there is such a thing as a truth, and we're all trying to approximate it. Maybe no one has a monopoly on it, no one's ever going to get directly to the thing itself, but we're doing our best to approximate the truth. I think where things have drifted to today is that that notion is seen as quaint in the circles the New York Times now moves in, which is a sort of woke, hard, progressive left side of the spectrum that has not only repudiated and abandoned liberalism, but looks at liberalism as a false inheritance. I think from something that's they would associate with what they call white supremacy, which is outrageous to me. But I think that's where things have gone. And but anyways, to return to Duranty, that Duranty covered up the Ukraine famine, and he's always gotten the blame for having done that, as if he just sort of just woke up one day and said to himself, as a journalist, I'm going to pass up the greatest story of the decade. I'm going to say nothing's going on here. No journalist ever does that. When a journalist gets a great story, what do? They run it. And what usually happens is that their editors, if the story isn't really well sourced or corroborated enough, are saying, whoa, 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 let's slow down. Let's maybe partially print it. Let's take some time. It's never the case that the journalist is saying, no, I'm not going to print this. I'm not going to run this. And Walter Duranty absolutely knew there was a famine being perpetrated by Stalin in Ukraine. He admitted as much to his colleagues. What we find out is that the New York Times was part of a network of very high level, very powerful, influential business people that were pushing for US formal recognition, government recognition of the Soviet Union, which to that point was still unrecognized by the US government. It was still a regime that had not received the imprimatur of the United States. And you could not convince the American public that the US should recognize this regime if it had just murdered for 3, 4, 5 million of its own people for no real reason. So, in order to grease the wheels for this recognition, the New York Times instructed its Russia correspondent, whose name was Walter Duranty, to cover up the Ukraine famine. And he did. And he got a Pulitzer Prize for doing that. And to return to the theme that we just discussed about accountability and never wanting to have that reckoning, the New York Times in 2005 or around there was sort of confronted by the Ukrainian American community about the Duranty Pulitzer. And in response, they hired a consultant who was a professor of history, I think from Columbia, to assess the situation and give them some guidance on what to do. And the professor told them, give the prize back. And their response was refusal to do so. They came up with the most bogus excuse possible, which is they didn't know where the actual prize, which is a coin, where this coin had gone. They didn't know where it was, so they couldn't give it back. But I don't think that's what the professor meant when he said give it back. I think it was more of the symbolic gesture of renouncing the prize. But anyways, they didn't want to give it back, and one of the reasons, the rationalization, I should say, for not giving it back was that they felt that to do so would be to quote unquote airbrush history the way the Soviets had done. Whereas in reality, to give the prize back would be to acknowledge the truth of the history, which is Walter Duranty lied. The New York Times lied about the Ukraine famine. It was not something that deserved a Pulitzer Prize or any other kind of prize, aside from maybe like a Razzie or something like that. But it was something that deserves shame and not glorification.